Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, it's Judgment Day for Malawi, where voters are casting their ballot in the country's closely watched election, the second in just over a year, after incumbent Peter Mutharika's re-election was annulled in a landmark court ruling in January. Also, prosecutors at the International Criminal Court appealed against the acquittal of former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo for crimes against humanity. Now, victims of the 2010-2011 post-electoral crisis in the country, in which 3,000 people died, fear that no one will be held responsible for their pain. And private constructions have erupted along Senegal's coastline. Many locals are growing increasingly frustrated with their loss of access to the sea and beaches. They want to rein in the sale of land to developers. But first, in Malawi, polls closed on Tuesday evening in the rerun presidential election. Counting of the ballots has begun in the two-horse race between President Peter Mutharika and opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera. Mutharika's win in last May's election was struck down in a landmark judgment by the Constitutional Court, and the rematch is being closely watched on the continent and beyond, as Sanam Chantier explains.
Malawians casting their vote this Tuesday in a rerun of the country's presidential election, and it's been dubbed an historic moment, a test for the continent. Can Africa tackle ballot fraud? Not only that, electoral expectations are running high. These polls come 5 months after the incumbent president's disputed victory was annulled over rigging. Malawi has since ditched its first-past-the-post system, so the winner has to get more than 50%. Now, earlier this Tuesday, after voting in southern Malawi, President Peter Mutharika criticized violence in the country's opposition strongholds. Critics have accused him of doing little to tackle corruption during his administration. This election is practically a two-horse race between the president and his main rival, who's leading a 9-party opposition coalition. Lazarus Chakwera said he believed the vote would be fair this time.
We believe this is our date with destiny, and this is the time for the beginning of a new Malawi.
Tuesday's vote comes at a time of concerns over the safety of carrying out an election during the global coronavirus pandemic.
Burundi has chosen its first prime minister in 22 years. Alain Guillaume Bunyoni is a former security minister who's currently under UN sanctions for his suspected role in orchestrating violence and political repression under the late President Pierre Nkurunziza. His disputed and eventually successful third-term bid of 2015 led to a spike in unrest and alleged atrocities. Nkurunziza died suddenly on June 8th. Bunyoni's appointment has been met with dismay by rights activists who had hoped new President Evariste Ndayishimiye might break with the hardline leadership of his predecessor. A Kenyan policeman suspected of killing a 13-year-old boy standing on his balcony has been charged with murder. Duncan Ndiema pled not guilty to shooting Yasin Moyo dead whilst enforcing a nighttime coronavirus curfew at the end of March. Kenyans have grown increasingly angry about the disproportionate use of violence by police during the coronavirus crisis. Many have drawn parallels with the recent protests against police brutality in the United States that followed the killing of an unarmed black man by an officer.
The killing of George Floyd shows that the police do not care about people's lives and thus act with impunity as they cannot face justice. The death of Floyd at the hands of the police is very similar to my son's. This has been going on for too long, and it has to stop. The police should respect the law. They are not allowed to kill without a reason in the first place.
Prosecutors at the International Criminal Court are appealing against the decision to acquit former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo of crimes against humanity. In January, charges over post-electoral violence in 2010 and 11, in which 3,000 people died, were dropped. The latest chapter in the fraught judicial proceedings has worried victims of the crisis who hold Gbagbo responsible for their loss and pain. Our correspondents report.
Remy Pongi has been almost completely blind since March 28, 2011. That was the day, he says, that pro-Gbagbo forces attacked him on account of his Burkinabe origins.
4 personnes qui m'ont torturé, cassé ici ma tête avec derrière calache. Et puis j'ai chicoté mon visage avec le ceinturon. Et puis ils ont mis gaz sur mon visage. Et puis j'ai été évanoui.
Since then, Remy has been unable to work. He spends most days sitting in his chair. Today, though, despite the rain, he and about 15 other victims of the post-electoral crisis have met up. Former President Laurent Gbagbo was acquitted of crimes against humanity in 2019 by the International Criminal Court. His alleged victims are scared that the chief prosecutor's appeal against this judgment will fail.
Nous voulons rentrer en action, mener des actions d'envergure pour nous faire entendre, pour dire à l'opinion nationale et internationale que les victimes existent bel et bien, que les plaies ne sont pas encore refermées.
In this local branch of the FPI, the party founded by Laurent Gbagbo, the feeling is altogether different. On account of COVID-19, they decided not to hold a public screening of the hearing.
Vous remarquez que nous ne sommes pas agités comme les autres jours parce que nous savons que le procès est fini. Il n'y a plus de procès à la haie. Seulement, c'est le dernier procès pour pouvoir libérer le président Laurent Gbagbo définitivement.
The FPI is now eyeing up October's elections.
Le président Gbagbo sera candidat et il sera le candidat du Front populaire ivoirien. C'est justement pour ça que nous sommes là, nous sommes en train de travailler. C'est pour lui que nous sommes au travail.
It will be months before we know whether the appeal against Gbagbo and Goude's acquittal will be granted.
South Africa is due to start Africa's first coronavirus vaccine trials this week. With over 102,000 cases and almost 2,000 deaths, it's the country on the continent that is worst affected by the pandemic. The vaccine's already being studied in trials in the UK, and 2,000 people in South Africa are due to take part in that pilot. The first doses are due to be administered in Johannesburg. Studies are also being carried out in Brazil. The Arab League's called for Ethiopia to delay the filling in of the Nile mega dam that it's building until it strikes a deal with its neighbours. The project has caused tensions with Egypt and Sudan, who also rely on the river's waters. Jean-Emile Jamin with the story.
A construction signalling hope for some, but for others it represents a grave concern. Colossal, with its 145-metre-high walls, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam could soon become operational. Ethiopia has announced that it will begin filling it as soon as July, a unilateral decision that has been met with anger and confusion amongst its Egyptian and Sudanese neighbours. They fear that their access to water will be cut short. The UN Security Council, meeting on Monday at the request of Egypt, called on the three countries to work together and resolve their differences peacefully. A few days earlier, the Ethiopian foreign minister had expressed his surprise that a referral to the council had even been considered.
The issue with the dam can be solved right here instead of taking it to the UN Security Council. We do not believe this is the mandate of the Security Council. The project is a developmental project. The precedence that this sets for the world in the future is very bad. This can also be considered as interfering in a sovereign nation's peaceful activity. Therefore, it is not right to do that.
The megastructure, under construction since 2013, has an expected capacity of over 6,450 megawatts, making it the most powerful hydroelectric structure in Africa. Ethiopia is banking on the reservoir to electrify and develop its country, but its strategic position on the Nile is worrying for neighbouring Sudan and Egypt, which depend on the river. Egypt, for instance, draws 97% of its water needs from the Nile. Addis Ababa, meanwhile, has sought to assure its neighbours that their water shares will not be affected.
Well, private constructions have sprung up along Senegal's coastline, and many locals are growing increasingly frustrated with their loss of access to the sea and the beaches. Calls are growing for authorities to rein in the sale of land to developers. Our team reports.
Dakar's Corniche is popular with both weekend joggers and serious athletes. Winding along the seafront for around 10 kilometres, it goes from the southern tip of the Dakar Peninsula to the well-to-do Almadis neighbourhood. But locals are becoming increasingly frustrated with a construction boom that's seen private sea-facing properties crowd out the waterfront.
S'ils continuent à construire sur cette corniche-là, ils vont finir par nous retirer tout ce qu'on avait pour respirer, prendre l'air, et les jeunes vont malheureusement se tourner vers d'autres choses.
The Corniche belongs to the government. Those worried about the amount of land being sold off, built up and paved over say authorities have let construction get out of hand. Minyan Diouf is among those who want to see some of these seafront buildings torn down.
Rien ne l'explique. Vraiment, rien ne peut expliquer ça. Face à la mer, tu clôtures une partie du littoral et tu te fais un château.
Minyan says construction blocks public access to many beaches.
Donc ça va être une bataille bien sûr difficile parce que nous allons le faire en face de gros bonnets comme celui-là, d'hommes forts au sommet de l'État. Nous sommes en train de nous préparer avec un pool d'avocats pour porter une plainte contre X afin que la justice sénégalaise puisse enquêter pour savoir ces attributions sur le littoral, qui les a autorisées.
The government is supposed to oversee coastal land management, but has denied that there is much that it can do about overdevelopment along the coast.
Plus de 95% de ces actes ont été passés avant 2012. Aujourd'hui, le plus important, c'est de voir l'avenir. Sur la corniche de Dakar, nous avons plus de 10 km, dont 5 km sont inoccupés. Si nous voulons faire du bien, si nous voulons permettre à nos populations d'avoir un accès équitable à la mer, mais nous pouvons aménager les 5 km.
The coastline along the capital isn't the only one under threat. Much of Senegal's 700 kilometres of seafront is being eyed up for its potential by private developers.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.